presentation on the North American bumblebee. So, a lot of people have misconceptions about bees. For example, a few years ago, I was in a bathroom stall at a restaurant, and I looked up and there was a giant bee just crawling up the bathroom stall, and I swear I saw my life flash before my eyes. I thought I was going to get stung. However, people don't always think about how important bees really are. So I am going to tell you. So first, the classification of the bumblebee. They are in the domain Eukarya, kingdom Animalia, phylum Arthropoda, class Insecta, order Hymenoptera, family Apidea, genus Bombus, and species Pennsylvanicus. So the bumblebee likes to be in places generally with a lot of vegetation and flowering plants. Therefore, they can collect pollen and nectar and pollinate the flowers. And they need the nectar for honey, for food. So these are places generally like wildlands, meadows, agricultural landscapes. So it lives in North America, which is very nice because the bumblebee they have a lot thicker fur on them, so they can keep warmer and they can generate heat, so that in the cooler North American climate they can survive. Also, they need places for nesting, so a lot of time this is underground in the winter, or places like abandoned squirrel holes or abandoned holes that were made by mice or rats or other rodents, and also abandoned birds' nests. They can also be in man-made structures like concrete walls. They'll find crevices in them, also sheds, abandoned birdhouses, rock walls, etc. They like dry, dark cavities to live in. Next, nutrition. So they only make a small amount of honey for the colony because they only need a small amount for the bad weather during their flight season. So that would be early spring to late fall. So they also collect pollen and nectar. They get carbohydrates from the nectar and proteins and lipids from the pollen. So reproduction, they are haplodiploidy, which means the queen can lay either diploid fertilized eggs or haploid unfertilized eggs. So when she lays the diploid eggs, those become females, and the haploid become males. So after the winter, the queen emerges from hibernation and she finds a nest, and she will lay eggs, and they will, for the most part, be diploid females, and the females will become the workers, and the workers will go out and pollinate and collect nectar. And later on in the flight season, that's when the queen will begin to lay haploid eggs for males and start thinking about reproduction, so that the males and females can then mate and make more queens, so that queens can leave the nest and make more colonies. So in the picture you see above, number 1 shows the queen in hibernation and finding a nest, and then she goes off and lays her eggs in number 2. And so then number 3 shows the female workers, and then they will go out and pollinate the flowers, and then some of the bees go off and they die before the winter, and then the rest of the females go off for hibernation during the winter. So evolutionary adaptations with climate changes, the bees have had to adapt. So there has been a decrease in vegetation due to climate changes, and so the bees have had a net shortage of their tongue length, so that they can, because there are a wider variety of plants that they can pollinate with a shorter tongue. So in ecological significance, so bees are very, very important to the pollination of different species of flowers and vegetation. So, so a lot of agricultural plants, for example, are very dependent on these bees. So plants such as blueberries and cranberries, which are very high value agricultural plants, depend on these bees, and also they are exclusive pollinators for greenhouse tomatoes and peppers. So, and also the bees visit a large variety of plants, so they provide pollination for all these plants. And the bees can do what is called buzz pollination, in which they stick their tongue in the flower and they can shake it, and it loosens trapped pollen, which otherwise would be trapped inside the flower. So they are essential for plants in cooler areas because they can keep warm and continue to pollinate. So humans have had a large impact on these bees. First, grazing. A lot of farms and agricultural areas have their animals grazing in open pastures, which decreases the amount of vegetation and the variety and diversity of the vegetation. So the bees don't have as much place to get food from. So there's a correlation between the amount of vegetation and the bees. As the amount of vegetation decreases, the bees in that area will also decrease, because it not only decreases the amount of vegetation, but also the places that the bees can live and nesting sites for them. There's also habitat fragmentation. So as cities and agricultural places, when there's plowing and mowing, it destroys the bees' nesting sites and wherever they would need to live, because these bees need roughly 800 to 2,500 acres to support a colony. And so with this habitat fragmentation, they cannot survive in several places. Also the use of pesticides. So pesticides, they're not intended to kill off pollinators, but they do have a large effect on these bees. They can either kill them, or in low doses they change the behavior of the bees, which can affect their reproductive behaviors. And also herbicides will kill off vegetation, which the bees need for pollination and to get food. Also urbanization, so the destruction of the natural habitat of bees and the building of cities or urban areas also has decreased the amount of bumblebees. However, the production of gardens can be helpful in larger cities so that the bees have places to pollinate and gather food. But there is less bumblebee diversity because